Gunfire Reborn is one of my favorite games. And I'm not joking either. I spent a lot of time playing Gunfire over the past year. I love this game, and I've played it a whole lot, and it doesn't take you hundreds of hours to figure out that there is one glaring problem with it, and that is Nightmare Mode. Nightmare Mode is a huge jump in difficulty from Elite Mode, and a lot of people that I know that played the game really enjoyed Normal Mode, really enjoyed Elite Mode, but then when they hit Nightmare Mode, they either stopped playing the game or they went back to Elite to slog through that to build up enough so that they can actually beat Nightmare Mode. And I want to explain today why that's a problem, and where it started, and how it could be fixed. To talk about the issue first, we have to go back in time. Before the game fully released, there wasn't Reincarnation mode. The game ended at Nightmare mode, so you were fully expected to spend the rest of your time playing the game maxing out your character just to get wins on Nightmare mode. But then at some point, they added in new difficulties, and Nightmare mode just became one of the hurdles along the way. However, that jump in difficulty never changed. When you look at the numbers between Elite Mode and Nightmare Mode, you can see why it is so much more difficult than going up to Reincarnation Mode. Alright, I'm going to use information from the wiki here and my own research to show you why it's such a jump in difficulty. So when you're looking at Normal Mode, obviously none of those stats are going to be changed because it's the very first mode of the game, of course. When you go up to Elite Mode, they're going to get a 1.4 multiplier to their health and damage. So basically a 40% increase to their health and damage from the normal mode. On top of that, bosses start doing their rage modes earlier, more enemies spawn in, there's now traps, and you can get challenge events and enhanced enemies. So if you're looking at like all the multipliers of difficulty, normal to elite mode does introduce a lot. You're going to be getting traps where you didn't, enhanced enemies where you didn't, and they get some flat bonuses on top of that along with the challenge events. But moving up to Nightmare Mode, you'll notice that this is now, instead of a 1.4, it goes up to a 2.4. So that's a whole additional, that's 140% instead of just a 40%. Now, that's not the only change. Of course, there's even more traps, more enemies, more challenge events, more enhanced enemies, and elites are able to spawn from challenge events, making it even harder. Just for a little bit of context on how many more enhanced enemies you should be expected to run into on your runs, I did one quick run in Elite Mode and one in Nightmare Mode of Act 1, and these were how many enhanced enemies I ran into in each stage. Obviously, the game's random. You're going to have random enemy spawns and random chances for enhanced types to show up. But this should give you an idea. So 20 there, 28 here. You can see that in Elite Mode, I had a natural increase from 3 to 4 to 5 to 8. And on Nightmare Mode, 5, 5, 10, 8. I can tell you that on the Elite Mode, that last one was one of the wave rooms, so where enemies are constantly spawning and dropping in, and I didn't have that kind of room in Nightmare Mode, so that's probably why there was a difference there. But you should expect to have about a 50% increase in the number of elite types. If I were to guess, since so many other things went up from a 0.4 to a 0.8 or something along those lines, it may have been a 40% increase in the enhancement. But because we don't have a hard number on that, it's hard to say. But should expect a reasonable amount more of enhanced enemies going from Elite Mode to Nightmare Mode. Let's look at the enhancements that you can get on some of these enemies. Almost all of these have some amount of damage or health increase, as one would expect. But you can end up with things like a big buff enemy having shielding or armored, and then also getting these effects down here, the secondary ones, the aggressive, agile, powerful, or robust, which are also doing huge multipliers. Remember that a 100% increase is double the health. So a 200% increase is triple the health, and 300% is 4 times the health. You're going to have so many more enemies that are enhanced. They're already getting another bonus just from the game mode. So Nightmare Mode's going to make that a times 2.4 health, and then any of them that are enhanced, and with the secondary enhancement, could get up to ridiculous numbers for where you're at in your account's progress. So you might think, well, you know, in total, Nightmare Mode is obviously going to be harder than Elite Mode, so it needs to get up. But that ramp in difficulty from normal to Elite is so much more difficult. And then, if you look at the jump from Nightmare Mode to Reincarnation Mode, it doesn't seem like that much more difficult. So The good thing about playing on Reincarnation mode is that you get a bunch of bonuses. You now get introduced to enhanced weapons, enhanced scrolls, as well as spiritual remnants. There's also a new shop in almost every stage called the Phantom Peddler, who will give you those enhanced guns and scrolls. And when you get the spiritual remnants, they can really open up your character to a bunch of new possibilities that you didn't have before. For that reason, Reincarnation level 1, I think, is significantly easier than Nightmare mode. And it doesn't get any harder until maybe Reincarnation 4. Once you get up to these level of multipliers, it kind of makes up for the fact that you're getting all of these other bonuses. So when you're looking at the scale of difficulty in the game, I feel like it goes something like this. Normal mode, it's kind of easy, depending on how familiar you are with various roguelike games and first-person shooters. Your first trip into Gunfire Reborn is going to be somewhat easy, maybe a little bit difficult. But as you get more points in your talents tree, you unlock more weapons, you unlock more scrolls, it's going to get significantly easier to the point where it's almost trivial to get a victory. Once you move up to Elite mode, again, you start with a decent jump in difficulty, but as you unlock more things and get more points in your skill tree, that difficulty goes back down. Now, you'll take a few attempts here to get to the point where you can get your win in Nightmare mode, but once you get in Nightmare mode, it is significantly harder. That jump is enormous. And you'll notice that it doesn't immediately go down because making progress in Nightmare mode in comparison to Elite Normal is far more difficult. You're going to get your teeth kicked in a lot more often because you're going to have that huge spike in the number of enhanced enemies. Their total health and damage is going to be just ridiculous in comparison. You're going to have to fight more elites along the way just to get the same number of scrolls and goblets that you would have gotten before. And so making progress in Nightmare mode is going to be very difficult until you get closer and closer to getting that maxed out account. Let's say you get a victory at some point in Nightmare mode and you unlock Reincarnation, you're going to find that Reincarnation 1 is easier than Nightmare mode. You're going to get those bonuses from the spiritual remnants, the enhanced guns, and the enhanced scrolls, and you're going to have a much easier time getting wins. And as I said, I feel like Reincarnation 4, the first time you run that, it will probably, at that point in your account history, be harder than Nightmare for the first time since doing Nightmare mode. And then the Reincarnation 5, 6, and 7 get a little bit harder than that. And at 8, that's when you got a reasonable amount of difficulty. It kind of comes down to RNG if you win Reincarnation 8. You know, the way roguelike games play out, you can really have boon or bust runs with that. But once you know what you're doing, you can usually edge it out and get a win no matter what. So why do I think this? Well, for one, I have maxed out 2 accounts. So I've had one account that I've had since before the release, where I've watched the game grow and change over time. And at the start of 2022, I made a new account and started over from scratch. And even with knowledge of being someone who beat Reincarnation 8 with all the available characters at that time, it's just so much more difficult. Knowing all of that, I think something needs to change. Since Nightmare mode is no longer the end game, what should happen is that the health and damage multipliers for Nightmare mode should be reduced a little bit to make it more possible for people to get their first win in it after only a couple runs, instead of having to slog through Nightmare mode for maybe 10 or upwards of 20 or 30, depending on player ability and random elements that could influence the victory of the run. And then maybe start tweaking Reincarnation 1 through 8 to be a little bit more difficult at the start because of all the enhancements and bonuses you can get from playing in that mode. That way it doesn't seem like Nightmare mode is hard, Reincarnation 1, 2, and 3 are easy, and then it actually starts picking up in difficulty again at Reincarnation 4. I think a lot more players would be able to get through Nightmare mode and start to enjoy the fun part of the game, well, the more fun part of the game, when you start getting into the Reincarnation levels. It's when things really start ramping up and getting ridiculous, and you can get these out of control runs that you never would have imagined when you first started out. Well, if you agree, let me know. If you disagree, let me know. Put it down in the comments. Give it a like if you like this video. And to see more of it in the future, subscribe. And until next time, take care of yourself and take care of those around you. Bye-bye.